Alright, girls, for this lesson, we are going to talk about why readers annotate or take notes as they're reading. So, we've talked a little bit about this, and we've done it a little bit in class with our thinking voice when we are actually reading the story with our reader voice, and then once in a while we stop and we take notes with our thinking voice. Sometimes we just talk about it, but we're going to talk today about how to record those thoughts. And Christina Smeckens, who we've been talking a lot about this year, talks about how important it is to take notes when you're reading. She says it's a lot like leaving footprints in the sand or on the concrete if you've been swimming or somewhere and you see your footprints. It kind of tracks where you've been, and you can go back and see where you've been. So taking notes is a lot like using your thinking voice and leaving footprints where you've been through the story. So sometimes your thinking voice might make a connection and you'll write down some sort of connection that you've made. We've talked a lot about making connections to yourself, your life, to stories you've read, and to real life events. Sometimes it'll be a visualization, so hard for me to say, about what you've seen in the story, what you're visualizing in your head. And then sometimes if it's a question or a prediction, you may want to record that. If it's something that you want to retell, these are all things we've talked about. So today we're going to talk about what do you do when you are taking notes. So we will look at these different marks that you can make. These are just some of them, and this is not necessarily what we'll use every time, but these are just some ways you could take notes. You can circle important words that you might have. You could add a synonym. We'll talk about that later this year, another word that means about the same. Or just write 2 or 3 words in the margin to the side about what you think it might mean. You might mark big ideas or something interesting with an exclamation point or a star. You might want to connect some ideas with arrows or take some notes with listing numbers. LOL, laugh out loud. You might find something that's pretty funny. If you have a question, you are going to put a question mark. Maybe it makes you think of a question that you have. Plus sign, you learn some additional information that you already knew some, and then you just made a connection with some new information. Or an arrow side to side that this is something that we probably won't really use in 2nd grade if you think the opinions contradict each other. Kind of go against what they already said. We're not really going to use that this year, but the question marks, the LOL, the plus signs, and the stars and circling are some things that we're going to use. So I want to show you how I would do this, and then I'm going to ask you to practice it. We are going to be, oops, that's not the one I want. We are going to be doing this throughout the year and this week, doing some more of this as we're taking notes. So as I'm reading this story about erosion, I'm going to make some marks as I read. So, nature is always changing. Those changes are called natural events. Some natural events happen quickly. Think of a fire that starts when lightning strikes a tree. Other events occur slowly, such as when rocks are worn down over hundreds of years. This happens because of weathering and erosion. I'm going to circle that word because we have been talking about erosion in class. I'm also going to talk about the fire. That's a connection that I have because a friend of mine has had some wildfires near where she lives in California before, and her family had to be evacuated. So that's a real world connection. And then this is a classroom connection that we have been talking about. So weathering is what happens when a part of a rock is loosened. Parts of rocks are usually loosened by nature. Erosion happens after weathering. It is a process of moving water, moving ice, or wind carrying away part of a rock. So I'm going to circle the word weathering. The word says weathering. It's making me wonder what a definition would be for that word. So if I look back here, weathering is what happens when part of a rock is loosened. So first, the weathering has to happen. So first, I'm going to put W for weathering. And then second is erosion. So see how I'm taking some notes to help me remember what I'm reading? Moving water can cause weathering and erosion. Have you ever seen waves crash against rocks on the shore? Exclamation point. Yes, I have. A connection. That is really interesting to me. I've seen that. The water can chip off small pieces of rock and carry them away. As more waves hit the rocks, more pieces are chipped off and carried away. Because of this, the rock gets smaller and smaller over time. So I have a question about that. I want to know, it says over time, but how long does that take? I know we talked about how sand gets at the beach, but how many millions of years are we talking about? Or thousands of years or hundreds of years? Moving ice can cause weathering and erosion. Some mountains have solid sheets of ice near the top. During warmer weather, a bit of ice melts. Then the sheet of ice may move slowly down the mountain. As the solid ice moves, it scrapes rocks, breaking off pieces. Then the pieces are taken away by moving ice. That is so cool. That is not something that I really thought about before or knew, so I might put a star there. So you can see my notes. If somebody were looking at this, they would be like, what in the world was Mrs. O'Connell doing? What do the stars mean? What do the circles mean? But as I was reading, I was able to take some notes for myself, so I can go back and see my own notes, and it doesn't matter what anybody else reads or sees or thinks of it. It's what I remember as I'm reading my story. So today, what you're going to do is you're going to read an article, and I want you to make some marks. Question marks if you have a question about it, a star if you think it was important, circle a word that maybe you don't know the definition for or it's a new word for you. So we're going to practice taking notes. And remember, it's only really for you. I will be looking to see that you did it, but I'm not going to go through and say, oh, I don't know what they mean by that star or that circle. So it needs to be something that you're going to remember when you come back to. And I will post the little check-off list so that you can see what kind of marks you can use. So this is just practice. You're not going to actually get a grade on it, but participation for just trying it, okay? We'll also be practicing this in class as well. Good luck, boys and girls. Let me know if you have any questions or problems.